the April 5th version of the Board of County Commissioners meeting, regular meeting. Welcome to our regular meeting. Mid-morning, we will reconvene as the Board of Health before we actually go through some of our... Someone has a microphone on, if you could silence that. Okay, we'll move forward now. We'll begin with the adjustments to the agenda. Mr. Mokrahajski, do we have any adjustments to the agenda other than emergency business that will be coming up?
No, we don't.
Very good. To the board, anything? All right, nothing there. Then under emergency business, Mr. Mokrahajski, we do have emergency business to attend to this morning. That's been announced, and the agenda has been updated to, I'm sorry, there'll be no emergency business during the regular board meeting. That will be during the Board of Health meeting. My apologies to everyone. Moving forward then with no emergency business, we'll move directly to public comments. Speakers are going to be taken in the order they sign up and limited to 3 minutes. I'll not be giving a warning prior to the end of the 3 minutes. At 3 minutes, your microphone will be silenced and we'll move along to the next speaker or to the next item on the agenda. So keep an eye on the clock. You should have a clock on the screen, it should be up right now. And I will turn to Ms. Jones to conduct the queue for the public comments. But I'll say this, if you have comments that you want to give to the Board of County Commissioners beyond what you're able to state today, be sure to send them in writing. And that can be addressed to attention Diana Jones at lanecounty.gov. So, Ms. Jones, public comment.
Thank you, Chair Farr. At this time, if you have registered to give public comment, if you will raise your virtual hands so I can see who in the queue would like to give public comment, I will begin calling upon you. I do see that Barbara Kenny, your hand is raised, so I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public testimony. I do show you are muted, Barbara.
Okay, I think I've got it now. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Barbara Kenny, and I'm a resident of East Lane County, and I live near Leesburg. I'd like to comment this morning about the amendment to the Lane County Interagency Deadly Physical Force Plan that was adopted as part of the consent calendar last week. The Deadly Physical Force Plan sets out the processes and procedures by which any use of deadly force by a law enforcement officer is investigated. As you know, I submitted a 3-page written comment about that prior to last week's meeting. My first question has to do with the Deadly Physical Force Planning Authority, which is the oversight body charged with developing the Deadly Physical Force Plan for the county. According to the memo from DA Perlow last week regarding the proposed amendment to the plan, there had been a meeting on March 14th, 2022 of the Planning Authority where they formally recommended the amendment to the plan. Our Planning Authority meetings required to be public, particularly when they vote on a change to the Deadly Physical Force Plan. If so, where was the meeting information announced for the March 14th meeting, and where will information about future meetings be announced? And my second question is regarding the independent report by an outside expert, Michael Ganacco from the OIR group, that DA Perlow requested and received last July. There's a link in my public comment from last week to the report if you'd like to read it. The report has 11 recommendations specifically for improvement to processes and procedures governed by the Deadly Physical Force Plan. In addition, Mr. Ganacco recommended that there should be an after-actions review of each investigation of an officer's use of deadly force to ensure that the required investigative processes and procedures were actually followed. Last September, there was an officer shooting where Mr. Gutierrez was killed. This would have been a good opportunity for an after-actions review. Statements from the District Attorney's Office last summer appeared to indicate they agreed with the after-actions review idea, and also that they had formed a work group that would report to the Planning Authority in order to consider Mr. Ganacco's other recommendations. Are you able to request that the Planning Authority provide information regarding their implementation or rejection of the recommendations in the report? And if not, is there any way for the public to know if they have considered the findings? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Kinney.
Thank you for your public comment. I do show that Ann Neeland has raised her hand. So Ann, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. Ann, I show you are self-muted. There you go. Ann, I'm going to restart your timer so you can begin. Ann, I show you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. At this time, I do not show any other hands raised. So Ann, I'll give you another moment to get your mic unmuted. Oh, actually, okay, I see Mr. Sanger has just raised his hand. So right now I will unmute Mr. Sanger, and Ann will try to return to you one more time after Mr. Sanger. Mr. Sanger, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comments.
Ms. Jones, can you give Mr. Sanger a full 3 minutes, please?
Yes.
Thank you. There you do.
Mr. Sanger, you may begin your public comment.
Good morning, Lane County. Thank you for offering this opportunity for public comment. I want to preface my comment with the request that if we are to care about public health, mental health, and the unhoused, can we please start putting some resources towards drug abuse mediation and prevention? Oregon Measure 110 decriminalized drug use, but our community has not seen the promised addiction services that led many to supporting the measure. The board is looking at emergency business this morning to use public health funds for housing. While this is a creative solution to address problems created by codes and restrictions, it is questionable whether the intent of these funds should be stretched in this manner, or that they might be more appropriate to addressing the underlying cause and the chain that keeps many unhousable. On to the other elephant still in the room. Last week, Commissioner Burney mentioned that there are no more mandates he is aware of and that this has become a matter of personal responsibility. While I appreciate this optimistic approach signaling a shift in tone, I must correct the record. Last week, I took my child to Costco to fill a prescription for an infected tooth, and they refused me service without a mask. The state of Oregon is making up administrative rules despite public opposition that are then enforced at threat of pulling a license issued by the same authority. This is tyranny, plain and simple, and the people are exhausted writing and speaking to plead for someone in an elected position to stand up to these unelected bureaucrats and say, enough. I would be pleasantly surprised if this body stood up and addressed the peer pressure that is being used to push biased viewpoints as policy. I appreciate the request to treat everyone equal and not look down upon individuals who have made a personal decision to continue masking, but the bleak reality is that individuals who have made a personal decision to not wear a mask are still being openly discriminated against in our community. This is abhorrent. This is not operating under a lens of equity or equality or fairness. Whatever ideology you are looking through, open discrimination should not be a part of it. As time passes, more information is coming out about the pandemic that refutes the extremist conservative approach that was used to shut down and reset society. We need to recognize that the guise of public health was abused to shut down dissent and prevent an open conversation in our community for nearly 2 full years. Is it inaccurate to compare this to the fervor that spread across Nazi Germany? I don't think so. I think to ignore the obvious parallels is a disservice to our community, and that blanket dismissals enable unjust actions. I don't think that Lane County commissioners are planning the extermination of the unvaccinated, but have none of you thought of the unvaccinated as unclean? And I had lost 10 seconds. May I please have 30 to finish? This brings us to the Nuremberg Code, which came about due to unethical medical experimentation during World War II. 2 years into the pandemic, the only vaccines available are under emergency use authorization, despite local leaders leading us to believe the vaccine was approved months ago. This means that any coercion, whether by carrot or stick, was an unethical medical experiment. This is the very definition of informed consent. To insist there is no comparison to the horrors of the Third Reich ignores the fundamental issue many residents of Lane County take exception to. We must step away from the Great Reset and return to traditional values of our community.
Thank you for your public comment.
I have one more sentence. May I please finish?
I will defer to the chair.
Please allow it. That's fine. Thank you. We did get a late start.
I apologize. Thank you. We must step away from the Great Reset and return to traditional values that our community, that yes, include helping the less fortunate, but we should be able to discuss from different viewpoints without fear of censorship or retribution in order to make informed decisions. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your public comment. I do show that Ann Nealand has logged on again, so I do show you are listed twice. I will try one of your other ones to see if I can get you in. I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. I show you are self-muted. There you go.
Good morning. This is Ann Nealand. I am concerned this week about free speech and how this board honors the oath of office that each board member signed to support the Constitution of the United States, including the First Amendment. After last week's public comments, Commissioner Buck said that she, quote, objected to, unquote, the sarcastic comment referring to Putin. Instead of pausing to consider, not necessarily agree with, a public comment, readily taking offense is one way to deflect the listener's personal responsibility to reflect on what was said and instead interfere with the message of the speaker. In light of the commissioner's oath, I think this is poor form. Similarly, Commissioner Trieger took the time to scold two community members who mentioned the Holocaust and concentration camps as being, quote, inaccurate historically and factually, unquote, and, quote, quite offensive to use those references in the framework of a public health response to a pandemic, unquote. First, I was one of the speakers whose remarks mentioned concentration camps as part of a direct quote from Aldous Huxley, and not the author of The Brave New World. From his book, Huxley is famous for his writings that seem more and more prophetic each day. Again, I believe we are better served by reflecting on these ideas rather than being closed off by taking offense. Second, I would like to remind this board of the very first principle of the Nuremberg Code that states, quote, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior forms of constraint or coercion, unquote. This is a historically accurate quote resulting from the coercive administration of experimental vaccines in Nazi Germany. During the current pandemic, the mRNA injections are to this day unapproved by the FDA and thus de facto experimental. Indisputably, many working people in America have been coerced by our government to take the experimental shot by threat of job loss, expulsion from school, removal from travel, among other situations, often without informed consent. The comparison is historically valid. The Nuremberg Code was written to prevent the repeat of the horrific government abuses of the Nazi regime, not to be swept under the rug as too offensive to ever mention again in comparable situations. I know after public comment, it is uncommon for the commissioners to even respond directly to the public statements made, so it is disappointing that two commissioners would gratuitously take the opportunity to speak out against substantive veracity and merits of specific public comments. I am disappointed, but not personally offended. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, Chair Farr, we have no additional speakers signed up for public comment. I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Then we'll move along to the next item on the agenda, which is response and remonstrances from the board. I'll open the queue. I'm sorry. There we go. I see no hands raised from the commission in the queue. Then I'll very quickly, I always love getting into conversations about the U.S. Constitution. I'm not going to do it at this point in time, but just a reminder that some of us, I took a test to become an American citizen, had to go to classes, take a test to become an American citizen. It's something that we don't do as much as we used to in schools. Civic education is not a mainstay of high school these days. And I think it's important that we understand, actually try to understand the meanings of the Constitution, and the interpretations are different as the years go on, but it really is interesting to know what free speech really actually is. There are a lot of essays written about what free speech actually is. So I see no further hands in the queue. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
I am wrong. I love being corrected in public with thousands of eyes watching.
I apologize for being so blunt. I was taking the chair up on his invitation.
I asked for it, and there's right there. Scroll up, Commissioner Burney.
Thank you very much.
You have 10 seconds. No kidding.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to follow your remarks. I feel like I'm an ex everything, and one of the things I'm an ex is I'm an ex high school government teacher. And when I taught government or civics was a requirement for graduation. And honestly, I've been horrified to learn that now it may be coming back. I don't know what form it'll take, but this critical area of study how our government operates, what rights people have and responsibilities we have as citizens in a democracy, what does that actually mean, is not understood by many, especially in this generation growing up. So I would like to say, without offending anyone, that I absolutely do believe in the First Amendment. I do believe, whether people agree or not, folks have the right to articulate their opinions and their views. And in fact, it's very interesting because we're seeing folks from different political extremes exhibiting the same intolerance, if you would, to the views of those that disagree with them. And I think the kernel and the heart of solving problems is listening to the truth of everyone, integrating that, and moving forward really to solve whatever the issue happens to be. So I just want to say that I actually agree that in many ways free speech is being inhibited these days, and that doesn't mean I always agree, with what's being said. And I just wanted to piggyback on that, Chair, because I think the comments we heard, and I thank those that provided them, that took time out of their days and out of their lives to provide them, are meaningful and passionate. And I just wanted to follow up on this whole notion of what it means, what free speech means, and what rights we do have. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. And I see Commissioner Bozovich, was that your hand going up? Negative.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. So, I carry one of these around with me. It's the Pocket Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, produced by the Cato Institute. So I do appreciate our Constitution and the oath we all swore as we were sworn into office to protect that Constitution, the state Constitution. And the Oregon Constitution actually has a much stronger free speech clause in it than even the Bill of Rights does. But what people forget sometimes is this was such a unique document. It was the first document where it recognized that the government derives its power from the people. It starts out with the phrase, "we the people." That's who grants all government in the United States power. We weren't selected by God to rule a kingdom. We were given the powers that we have in a limited basis from the people. And those powers that weren't specifically described in this or the Oregon Constitution and subsequent legislation, we just don't have those powers. And I really, want to thank the people that do come here during public comment, because we are hearing from the people that granted us the powers that we exercise as elected officials. And I think it's important to listen to them. And I just want to say, thank you all for coming to testify today. Everybody was polite and gracious, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And scrolling up the queue, I see no further hands raised. Going, and we are moving along. Thank you for testimony. Thank you to the public, and thank you to the commissioners for response. We're going to move along to our joint meeting of the Board of Health and Board of County Commissioners. At the sound of my egg gavel, I will be recessing the Board of County Commissioners and reconvening in a joint meeting of the Board of Health and Board of Commissioners. Welcome to the Board of Health, Board of County Commissioners. Mr. Mokraisi, I'll look at you for any adjustments to today's agenda.
No, we just have the one emergency business item, Chair.
Excellent, and thank you for bringing up item 2, which is emergency business. There was a recent revision adding the view material. So if you're looking at an old copy of the agenda, the view material is not on it. If you refresh, you'll find view material, and you look at a letter that we're for a Medicaid waiver application letter of support, and it's written by Kate Budd, who is our program manager in Human Services. And Ms. Mokraisi, I'll turn it over to you and the panel for the action on our emergency business.
Thank you, Chair. We have Kate Budd with us. Kate is our program manager in the Human Services Division. And Kate, would you just walk the board through why we're requesting this item?
Indeed. Thank you, Commissioner Farr and other commissioners. Appreciate your time this morning. Before you is a letter of support to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for the Oregon Health Authority's requested renewal of the 1115 Medicaid waiver. The Oregon Health Authority is applying for a second Medicaid waiver, and when waivers are requested, a myriad of innovative, flexible benefits may be proposed. In this second waiver, the Oregon Health Authority is requesting flexibility to provide supportive housing and rent assistance benefits through Medicaid. This benefit would allow eligible recipients of Medicaid who have higher needs to receive housing stability supports that aid in the search for housing and continue to provide supports once the household is housed. Those supports may include coaching around accessing healthcare services, cleanliness and money management, reminders to take medications and to pay rent and utilities, and to help the tenants interact well with their landlords and neighbors. Individuals may also receive move-in cost assistance, assistance with mobility assistance items such as ramps or handrails, and up to 12 months of rent assistance in order to help stabilize individuals in housings. I can share that Washington State has similar benefits, and it has proven to be a strong complement to the services provided by the homelessness and housing programs. It's expanded the number of agencies providing housing-focused supports, increase the number of people with housing support so that they can remain stable in housing, and it's also increased the number of peer supports available to people who have mental health and physical health challenges. Overall, incorporating housing supports into the Medicaid waiver has been shown to greatly increase the overall social determinants of health for people with higher needs, and it will be one additional tool to assist in the overall efforts to reduce homelessness within the community. I thank you for your consideration of this letter of support and want to recognize that it is due by April 15th to the Oregon Health Authority.
Hence the nature of the emergency business that we're conducting today. Ms. Mokrajski, I see that Eve Gray is with us, and I wonder if Ms. Gray has anything to add to the proceedings today.
Thank you, Chair Farr. You know, I think that Ms. Budd did an excellent job of describing the rationale for our support. And we are on an ongoing basis looking for sustainable funding for our housing programs, and particularly permanent supportive housing. The funds that we have been using are largely grants or one-time funds, and to have a sustainable program through Medicaid billing would be very beneficial in terms of our ability to sustain and grow these programs over time.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Ms. Mokrajski, anything further?
I don't think so, unless there are questions, Chair.
Then I'll turn it over to the board for questions, and I will look to the queue. I see no hands raised currently. Then I believe the action that we need today, Mr. Mokrajski, is a motion to accept the letter for submission. Is that correct?
Correct.
Then I'll call on Commissioner Buck.
I'll move approval of the Medicaid waiver application letter of support to, was it the Oregon Health Authority? Is that right? Okay.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Burney. That is the approval of the letter to the Oregon Health Authority. Any discussion to the motion? I see no discussion. Then I'll call for the vote. All those.
Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I apologize. Commissioner Bozievich has his.
You both have your hands up. I need to scroll up on my queue. Boy, I'll tell you, out of practice here. Commissioner Bozievich, followed by Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting, even before Mr. Sanger's comments in public comment, my concern about this waiver is the mixing of missions between federal authorities and how this is not the way we should be doing government, to be honest. Housing and urban development provides housing from the federal government. Medicaid is supposed to be providing medical care, and we're basically starting to completely mix that message. And we start doing that consistently across various departments where we're using funds in one place for, transportation funds for energy programs and housing funds for medical and medical for housing. Nobody understands what they're getting in a budget and what they're getting legislatively from government. And I am concerned about this waiver. There are some things in the waiver about other portions of our health system that require waivers to support. So I'm a little bit reluctant to support this purely on the housing side. And I understand that housing supports, the medical health of people. It's just the mixing of the missions and the legislative authority of health and human services versus housing and urban development. And I won't be supporting this letter of support. It's getting to where we are not understanding what our government does because we keep mixing the missions up so badly of our government departments, and I can't support that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I see Commissioner Burney, you've lowered your hand.
Oh no, I just did it because I always forget to. I want to.
Very good. I'll have a response also, but to Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. I have two things to say. First, I have a fundamentally different perspective than the one we just heard. My perspective is I wish these government bureaucracies would block grant everything to locals, provide waivers for all the strings they have attached so we can really address problems as they really occur on the ground at the local level. So I absolutely support this waiver. But I also wanted to say this, and I'm using this to bring up a related topic. I've had, my guess is other commissioners had, a number of calls from seniors living on fixed incomes. And unless we start addressing, and then, that needs some sort of something, and unless, I don't know whether it's this body, but unless we as a country start addressing the impacts of inflation on critical needs of seniors and the impacts in a completely unbalanced tax system in this state where everything is so heavily linked to property taxes, how that also can contribute to a problem that this waiver and so many of our programs are trying to solve. So I just wanted to bring up those 2 points, and I'll be supporting the waiver. And thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Clearly articulated. At some point, I'd like to talk about fixed income. It's not just seniors that have fixed income. Most Americans have a fixed income. And those among us who don't have a fixed income, quite often the income is diminishing as opposed to staying stable. So it's an interesting discussion, but that's not for this particular meeting. Regarding the mixing of federal agency messages, I think as we look at increasing our focus on social determinants of health, that does blur the lines because really the social determinants of health kind of go across all agencies because housing is certainly a cause of ill health. I mean, there's no question about that. I think we all agree. So I'm supporting this because I think in my mind, Ms. Gray, I will say that social determinants of health is something that I've still not fully defined. I think the definition is evolving all the time. We find new things that if we address this particular item, people are going to avoid ill health. And I say avoid ill health, I mean, avoid getting really sick, avoid dying from complications of not living in adequate housing. The kinds of things that people die from are the things that are affecting health. And because of that, I believe as we address social determinants of health, we're going to have to blur agency lines. We're going to have to do all that we can to address people's health at the very base level where the people are getting sick, not after they get sick, but what is causing people to be sick. And I believe that Ms. Budd, this letter that you prepared for us helps us to begin to address that in some ways. That's why I will support it. Any further discussion? That being said, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Passes 3-1 with Vice Chair Trieger excused. Ms. Gray, Ms. Budd, thank you very much for this presentation. And Mr. Mulcahy, we'll move along to the balance of our agenda on the Board of Health, moving directly to, pardon me, I'm scrolling. County Administration, we're going to have a discussion on COVID-19 response and recover, and Ms. Gray is going to be conducting that today. Ms. Mulcahy, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panel.
Thank you. Let Ms. Gray take it over and lead the discussion.
Thank you. And I will turn it over to Mr. Johnson, who is right here and ready to present an update on the COVID-19 response and recovery.
Well, good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for having me today. I am sitting in for Dr. Warren this week, who is out, luckily getting some respite, some time away, which we all probably deserve in this time frame. Also, I have the honor of joining you today during National Public Health Week, so I really appreciate this opportunity just to take a moment to recognize the colleagues here in public health who have been working hard to address COVID for couple of years now, more than 2 years in response to COVID, but also working hard to continue to do all the other things we do to help our communities thrive and really prosper and stay healthy. And so it's a great opportunity to work with the folks who are here who are passionate about health, passionate about public health, and really commit their time to this. So thank you again. Also, I appreciate this chance to be here with you today to talk about COVID, because really this is probably one of the better periods of time in a while. We do continue to sit in a very stable period at the moment, not seeing any large bumps, not really a lot of areas of concern. Of course, we're still at an elevated response. It's still out there and spreading in the community pretty effectively, but we are definitely not an uptick, and we seem to be pretty stable. So with that, I'm going to attempt to bring up my slides. Hopefully this works smoothly. If it does not, you can let me know.
No luck yet, Brian.
Okay, one moment here. Are the slides up for you?
Yes, up now. And sorry, Mr. Johnson. It's good to hear your voice again, by the way.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alrighty, so just to jump in here, as I was mentioning, the primary variant in circulation right now is the BA2 variant of sub-variant of Omicron. And it has become the prominent one in the community that we're picking up through cases and also nationally. So we're not surprised to see that happening. With this happening, though, we are at the moment, even though it is considered a much more virulent variant, it will spread more readily than what we've seen up to this point. It is not spreading so rapidly, largely because there are a large number of folks who are either have recently had COVID or who are vaccinated against it. So this is helping to limit the spread, and we're in anticipation of that. We're not expecting any large upticks, although we may see an uptick at some point, just maybe not as high as we've seen in the recent past. So the slide you're looking at right now shows you that steady downturn. We are now at about 44 cases per 100,000 in the community as of April 2nd, or as of March 31st, I should say, and still spreading in the community. But as I said, it's kind of stable at the moment, which is a good sign, and we anticipate that to happen into at least the near future for the time being. One of the most important things we are paying attention to is hospitalizations and deaths. We are really hopeful that we will continue to avoid the more severe effects of COVID, including folks who may be dying from COVID. At this point, we've had no new deaths within the last week or so. We do continue to have a small number of folks who are hospitalized and in the ICU units as well. and some patients on ventilators, but very small numbers relative to what we were seeing, especially back in January. We are, of course, paying attention to that. Any upticks in that would be of concern, and we want to continue to monitor that, and we'll do so. We have crossed a threshold of over 500 deaths, sadly, at this point in the pandemic. However, we hope that we will stay relatively close to the levels we are at for the time being.
I apologize, Chair. When you say we, who's we? Are you talking Lane County?
Lane County Public Health.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Apologies for not being clear about who I'm speaking about and to and for. So currently, vaccine remains our primary strategy for addressing COVID in the community. So we do continue to push out vaccination. We have crossed the threshold for over 70% of the community to be fully vaccinated at this point, which is a good marker in how we're doing. Folks do continue to trickle in to get vaccinated, as well as the vaccine is pretty widely available through primary care providers, hospitals, healthcare settings, where folks can get it generally pretty readily. Folks are also coming back for their booster shots, and some folks are taking advantage of that at this point as well. So we are seeing that continue to happen. We do anticipate in the not too distant future that there will be approval from the FDA to begin vaccination for children between the 6 months and 4 years of age. So we are planning in anticipation of that possibility and preparing for supporting that distribution in the community, although our primary focus is really in supporting our pediatric providers and making that possible, and then filling in where we have concerns about equity or access, or folks who are in greatest need not really getting the access to vaccine that they might choose to do so. So that is our current planning and work, although we also continue to provide a number of pop-up clinics in the community. For example, this week have 5 scheduled pop-up clinics and 7 testing sites to continue to monitor for folks testing positive for COVID. Our roving teams really continue to also work in home vaccination settings, visiting small businesses, camps, bus stations, libraries. That's where they're going to assist and be readily available and accessible to folks who might be looking to be vaccinated at this time. And of course, we continue our partnerships with our community-based organizations who really support outreach to folks who may not be accessing it in other venues as well. So I've appreciated their support and ongoing participation in vaccine distribution. Also, as part of our strategy, we do continue to provide isolation and quarantine supports in the community, primarily to folks who might be experiencing homelessness, although our levels of need and support are quite a bit down, and that just has to do with the reduced spread in the community. But over the course of this pandemic so far, as you can see the numbers up on the screen there, we've provided support through the River Avenue facility early on in the pandemic. We have leased a hotel that was providing supports and along the way. At this point, we've actually ended the lease with the hotel and have reduced down our supports to a much smaller setting, working in partnership with Carry It Forward and the Integrated Holistic Aid Collective, who are providing support for those who are unhoused and making sure that they have a safe place to be with adequate shelter and opportunity to get well, really. We've had no community requests for isolation this past week. So if that continues, that's potentially a very good sign. And then upcoming on our planning, as we continue to work through this, we're really continuing to assess our staffing needs and make adjustments as needed, partly in anticipation, really looking at both possibilities. One, that we might be needing to reduce staffing as the need goes down, but also not so far and not eliminating any reserves to the point we can't quickly ramp back up if we should see another uptick in the near future. So that's a fine line to walk, but we're doing that as best we can and working closely on monitoring that. And then we are tentatively working towards a volunteer appreciation event in June. We had to cancel last year because of the surge in Omicron, but we're hoping we will get a chance, given good, healthy conditions, to provide an opportunity to recognize all of the contributions that have really made this response possible, the hundreds of volunteers that have contributed to public health and to Lane County's work in the community. So that is on the horizon. And then also we are planning, as I've mentioned already, planning for approval of the vaccine for children age 6 months to 4 years of age. In the not too distant future, we anticipate. So with that, I think I will stop there and leave it for questions or however you want to proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gray, Mr. Johnson. I'll turn it over to the board for questions. I have a number of questions, Brian, but with luck, I won't have to ask them because other commissioners will ask them first. So look into the queue. I see no one with hands raised. So there we go. Thank you, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. The vaccinations or the additional boosters, I should say, that are being recommended for those that are 50 or older, how are we assisting with that new news?
So a couple different ways. We continue to support the distribution through our primary care providers and other healthcare providers in the community who can provide vaccine directly to folks who have that as a way to get vaccinated, and then continuing to use our other methods. So the pop-up clinics, as well as primarily directing folks towards the site at the Autzen Stadium, which continues to be a good location for folks to come in and quickly get vaccinated, is where we're directing most folks to if they aren't unable to get through the primary care provider at the moment. Otherwise, promoting it and just really helping folks understand what their options are and how to gain access if they need to. Thank you for asking.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Buck actually asked one of the questions I was going to ask in a little bit different way, but I will note that trying to get the 4th dose booster for my wife before she travels to Great Britain and France in a month, going to OMG, who is our primary care provider, they are not scheduling any vaccinations right now because they're so overwhelmed and understaffed. Basically, they say that if you do already have an appointment, you might be able to get one while you're there, but they're not scheduling individuals for vaccinations right now. So it's really difficult. And as I was trying to navigate our website to see where I could get a 4th dose, at least as of yesterday morning, I couldn't find. Now today I just looked and it was directing people to come to the Autzen Stadium Clinic. So it's been updated since yesterday. So at least the information's a little bit better. And of course, you know, as the CDC changes recommendations, you guys have to kind of go with the flow. So I understand how that lag happens. But it is an issue right now for a lot of people that are looking for that 4th dose. And particularly, you know, the wife being older than 60 and having asthma and getting ready to travel out of the country was looking for some source of that booster, and we're having trouble finding one. So my other question was the 44.1 cases per 100,000. The graph doesn't go far enough back to see this on the current status. In the epi curve, it's, if you put up the entire date range, it's very difficult to see. But is that higher or lower than the lull prior to Delta? To try and put some perspective on that, because I believe it's still higher than the dip we saw pre-Delta, which I wanted to try and make, you know, our community aware of. What the numbers look good on the graph you showed. We're still not as low as we were pre-Delta, and there's still a significant amount of transmission out in our community. You know, it's good news, but it's not as good as it was maybe, you know, pre-Delta. Am I accurate in that assessment?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, that is absolutely true. We're still seeing widespread communities are spread within the community, and it's certain that the levels are still are moderate and definitely not as low as we had seen in the past, for sure. What's different is it's pretty stable at the moment, which is, I guess, that's a promising thing, although we'd still like it to see it go down further, because we want to get to a point where it's not spreading readily. What we're really looking at is just pockets and outbreaks would be, or not at all. That would be the best case scenario, but I don't think we're going to see that. So yeah, you're absolutely accurate. I think, and with that graph, what's a little bit misleading as well, if we were to take the whole outbreak or the whole pandemic in perspective, you get that giant peak that happened in January. It basically flattens out the entire rest of the graph in perspective as far as what that looks like. So it's really helpful to see what this is looking like at the moment, I think. But you're right, it's still out there. Thank you.
I just wanted to put that kind of in perspective for people that, you are looking at that January Omicron surge of case numbers, but we're still higher than we were pre-Delta when we thought we were done, in some ways, as Commissioner Burney likes to mention now and then. And it's just important that we still be aware. But what's fortunate, though, is we are seeing, very little hospitalization because of the amount of people that have been vaccinated, which lowers disease severity. I'm cautiously optimistic, but we're not out of the woods.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. And I see no more hands raised. I'm kidding, Commissioner Burney. I saw your hand raised.
How would I know? You didn't ask. Thank you very much, Chair. Commissioner Bozovich is cautiously optimistic, and I'm optimistically cautious. I really didn't want to raise my hand, Chair, because I wanted to force you to ask some questions and I didn't all ask them prior. So mine is going to be a little different. First, as a data geek, Mr. Johnson, I would say if you don't have over time kinds of longitudinal studies, and as you said, we're relatively flat at the moment, at any moment, we're relatively flat. But once we get beyond that moment, forgive me, I knew Jay'd like that. My wife sent me an article in the New York Times of April 3rd, and it's titled "COVID and Diabetes Colliding in a Public Health Train Wreck." And it identifies that experts hope policymakers will take notice and finally get serious about tackling the nation's diabetes crisis. In this, Mr. Johnson, I don't know if you're aware, I recommend the article to you. It identifies that 30 to 40% of all COVID deaths are with people that have diabetes. This had my wife's desired effect. And at the end of the day yesterday, and again, forgive me, but Commissioner Bozovich, at the end of the day, I went to the good old in Commissioner Buck's district, Cresswell Health Mart Pharmacy, where I received my booster because my wife scared the crap out of me. And I talked with the pharmacist, Cresswell, rural area. And I said, what are you seeing? Are people still, generally in terms of who you see vehemently opposed or questioning what is being put in our bodies or the efficacy and all of this? And it was just interesting. This is just anecdotal, but he said, at first, yes. At first, those that came in, many were begrudging. He said, but I think people are just trying to stay healthy now. I think people are just trying to stay on top of it and get vaccines. And we, at least at the Cresswell Health Mart Pharmacy, that does have vaccines. And by the way, Mr. Johnson, you didn't mention pharmacies, and I want to encourage you to, because they're also part of our delivery system. That's not being seen right now. So I just wanted to relay that, both the data about diabetes and COVID and the one anecdotal perception about sort of the change in the public attitude. I guess my only question for you, Mr. Johnson, is the Lane County 72.5% of the population now have been vaccinated. Is that above or below the state of Oregon average?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner. So my understanding is that's actually above the state of Oregon, or very close to the average at this point. So.
I read an article that said the state of Oregon was at 77%. Maybe that's incorrect, though.
Well,
the entire state.
Yes, and I shouldn't speak off the top of my head. I'd actually have to confirm that information for you. But overall, Lane County's been doing really well. And as you know, we have a very good mix of folks across the spectrum of political beliefs and beliefs about vaccination. And so overall, to see the numbers that we have has been really a tremendous accomplishment, honestly.
Thank you, Chair. And I hope I didn't ask a question that you were going to ask.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Bernie, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your responses. No, a number of the questions that I have were answered by previous questions, that the answers to previous questions. But I do have a couple of questions that are, you know, a bit blunt. I'll apologize for being a bit blunt, because sometimes the testimony toward us is blunt. Sometimes we're all a little bit blunt, and in this, pardon me for some of the blunt language I use. The first one won't seem so blunt. Brian, Mr. Johnson, you stated that vaccination and prior contraction of COVID is diminishing the spread of the new variant, even though it is a more active, more virulent variant. By the way, P.S., what is the variant called?
BA2 variant.
BA2. So we skipped Pi. I'm glad we skipped.
It's actually a subvariant of Omicron, if that helps.
Okay, good. And I'm glad we skipped Iota too, because you know, alphabet, sometimes the alphabet has other meanings in our language. You stated that vaccination and prior contraction is diminishing the spread. Do we have factual data on that? Because there are people sometimes who testify who disagree with what you're saying.
Excuse me, could you restate the question again? I missed part.
Do we have any empirical data on the vaccinations and prior contraction of COVID is in fact diminishing the spread of what is actually a more virulent variant?
I think what we can say definitively is what vaccination does reduce the severity of the variant. It does not necessarily mean that folks will not get infected by COVID and develop, potentially their symptoms could be very, very mild and their ability to spread would be greatly reduced. But to say that it would in fact absolutely prevent an outbreak or like a large uptick is not entirely factually correct, but it would be, what would happen is its ability to really jump and leap quickly is greatly diminished by the ability to be vaccinated or prior exposure to COVID.
Thanks for that. And I think in kind of a little clause in the middle of that, you included something that's very important, that the effects on people who are vaccinated and boosted are so mild that sometimes they don't get reported. Sometimes people don't go in for a test because, you know, I feel a little bit rummy today, but not so bad. I would imagine that reduces the numbers. My second one is going to be a bit more blunt. We continue to hear that that the numbers of COVID deaths, COVID-related deaths, 500 right now in Wayne County have 500 right now. People say that those numbers are inaccurate, and they say they're inaccurate because some of those people would have died anyway. There's my bluntness. What do you say about that? I mean, do we have any data on that? Have we generated or have we received any data on who would have died anyway? I hate saying it.
People, would they have died anyway from something else? Unlikely. What we're seeing at this point, you know, is a great, you know, for example, you see across the country a reduction in the average lifespan, which suggests that people are actually dying at an earlier age in particular, and a large number of those folks died from COVID in particular. So the COVID and the complications related to COVID. So folks are dying earlier and premature from it. And that, if we just assumed that those folks were, even if we just made an assumption, all the folks who passed from COVID were elders or folks who were suffering from a chronic condition that would have resulted in early death, that would not have translated out that way. What we've seen are folks dying across the spectrum at earlier ages, tragically, from the effects of COVID. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that response to what was probably an unfair question, Mr. Johnson. But, you know, like all commissioners, I like to be able to answer people when they ask me questions, wherever I happen to be, and answer it as direct as I possibly can. That you've given me language to answer at this point, but I may have further questions to really give more substantive answers to people who say, no, most of those people, most of those 500 were going to die within a few weeks anyway. So that's a, you know, I hate to put it in those terms, but thanks for that. That really answers my questions. Ms. Gray, thank you.
We would also be happy to get the commission data on excess deaths that have occurred. There have been some studies done around excess deaths, meaning how many deaths would we expect in a calendar year and how many excess deaths have happened. And that can add some numbers to this as well, since we don't have reason to believe that there was a different variable in there that would have impacted the number of deaths that we have seen over the last couple of years on a national scale.
Thank you. And, you know, one thing that I want to try to avoid is, you know, people look at me and Commissioner Burney and Commissioner Bozovich and Commissioner Buck and say, you're just politicians. You say what it takes to get the answer out and get me quitting to ask questions. I don't like that, because I don't think any of us are just politicians. We're all human beings who really want to provide service to the people that we serve. And really having answers that really answer their questions, really, rather than kind of dodge and say, well, you know, the numbers show us that more people, you know, the average age of death has lowered. So if we can get a little bit more information on that, I hate dodging questions and I hate passing them along also, although often you have to dodge questions and often you have to pass them along. So thank you, Ms. Gray, for that addition. To the board, I see Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. Just real quick, if you want to scroll back on my Facebook page to about this time last year, when the death data was certified for 2020, because it takes about 2 months for them to finish up that, I actually put together a spreadsheet study that I put up on my Facebook page that shows, you know, the total deaths in Oregon for 20 years prior to 2020 and then 2020, and the differential in that, so that people can see what are truly excess deaths. And in Oregon, there was a significant jump in excess deaths. And I did the same thing for the entire United States. And it was an incredible increase in excess deaths. And there is no other explanation than the COVID pandemic. You know, that's, yeah, I know people want to, you know, say that, you know, that way there's no issue about what the cause of death was or anything else, you know, or whether people would have died anyway, because that's, you know, the only thing you're looking at is, did somebody die and how many in total per, you know, per 10,000 in Oregon. I set the data up and I think I was doing it per 100,000 US, and there is absolutely indisputable statistical data proof, which Joe would love, that we had excess deaths in 2020. And I'm sure if I did the same study for 2021, it would prove out that 2021 was also right up there, particularly with the Delta surge at the end of the year. So I know people want to question little pieces of data and pick one particular case where somebody's death was misreported. This is, you know, you take that total deaths where it doesn't matter what cause was reported, there were a statistically abnormal amount of deaths in that year, and the only explanation was the COVID pandemic.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Bozovich. I'm going to pull that down and use that in some of my responses, because quite often, as you state, if you take a few steps back and look at data, just like any picture, you see it a little bit more clearly, rather than looking at looking at the pixels, so to speak. So very good. Any further from the board? I see nothing. We have no action required today for the Board of Health. So Ms. Gray and Mr. Johnson, anything further?
Thank you, Commissioner. The only thing I would add, just I would correct my statement that the vaccine rate in Lane County is certainly lower than overall in the state of Oregon. It's at 72, slightly over 72%, and as Commissioner Burney had stated, it's roughly around 77% for the state of Oregon currently for fully vaccinated.
Right on. Thank you, Brian. Then if I wanted to leave this meeting today and go get my 4th booster, my 4th shot, I should go to either Austin Stadium or the Cresswell Pharmacy, or probably just about any pharmacy. Is that a correct thought on that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're covered. Excellent presentation today, Mr. Mokrahajski. Without any further business for the Board of Health, at the sound of my gavel, we will adjourn the joint meeting of the Board of County Commissioners and the Board of Health and reconvene as the Board of County Commissioners. Welcome to the Board of County Commissioners. We have before us, Commissioners, a consent calendar. Anything on the consent calendar that the public wishes to view the details of, click on View Material. It'll give you all the details that we have seen in consideration of these items for the consent calendar. Nothing at this point has been pulled from the consent calendar. Do I have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Burdick. We have the consent calendar for April 5th, 2022. Discussion, I see none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0 with Vice Chair Trieger excused absent. And we'll move along to the Sheriff's Office. We have before us Order 22-0405-06 in the matter of delegating authority to the Sheriff and the Labor Relations Manager for a lateral signing bonus of time management hours for external Deputy Sheriff applicants. And today, Ms. Mokrajewski, I'm going to turn it over directly to the Sheriff, who will introduce his panel, which includes Chief Deputy Carl Wilkerson. Sheriff Harold, are you with us?
Commissioner, I do not believe the sheriff is with us today.
And Chief, I will turn it over directly to you, Chief Deputy. Please continue.
Okay. Well, good morning, commissioners. Thank you for your time this morning. We're asking that the board delegate authority to the sheriff and labor relations manager for offering time management as a signing bonus for lateral hires for the Sheriff's Office. Currently, the Sheriff's Office has multiple vacancies within the Police Services Division, in large part to the SRS allocation for funding to enhance our patrol to get us to phase 2. Currently, not just the Sheriff's Office, but law enforcement in general is having somewhat of a hard time in recruitment because of the law enforcement field is not as appealing as it once was because of a number of issues. In the face of this, most agencies now are offering signing on bonuses, recruiting bonuses, specifically for lateral hires. The benefit of having a lateral hire is these people are people who are already certified in the state of Oregon, have already been trained, and can come to us kind of plug and play, as opposed to how we've traditionally done business of hiring people and then training them to do the patrol job. Here locally, there's pay incentives up to $10,000 to hire a lateral. There's oftentimes both vacation and sick bonuses that are being offered to laterals. And we feel like that we can recruit by offering a very modest incentive of just some time management, 80 hours initially when they're hired, and then 80 hours after a year of service with the Sheriff's Office. This gives our laterals the ability, who are coming from another organization with time banks, to have the ability to perhaps take a little bit of time off in that first year, as opposed to having no banks at all, being a new employee. This is modest, and like I said, in comparison to what most of our local agencies are doing for these recruitment efforts. And we believe that this will help us fill those positions that the board has approved, getting us to phase 2. So that is our request today, is that the board give that delegated authority to the sheriff and the labor relations manager to authorize that modest incentive of time management for lateral hires. I would also like to say I've had communication with the LCPOA board, and they are not opposed to this incentive package for our laterals. And that's all I have, unless you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Chief Deputy. I'll turn it over to the board for questions. I'm looking at the queue currently, and I see no hands raised. I'm going to give that just one moment to see if anything jumps out. I think you've covered it fairly succinctly that we have authorized new positions, and in order to bring a little bit of parity, make our positions more attractive, we're offering a little bit more incentive to sign. Is that a good summary?
It's a great summary, and I'll just add it's very, very modest in comparison to what most police agencies are doing right now. Okay,
very good. And Chief Wilkerson, our Sheriff's Department often is encroached on by other departments trying to lure our deputies away. Is that still an occurrence?
I would say that we have a very good product and people are trying to get their hands on our product being people who are committed to serving our community. We're doing a very good job of holding on to our people mostly, but that doesn't stop people from trying to recruit our deputies.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Burney.
Yes, Chief Deputy, I was recently at the swearing in of Springfield Police Chief Andy Shearer, and have had conversations with people in that department who I know because my kid used to be in that department. I'm acutely aware of the trouble they're having and the vacancies that they have. My understanding is that this is the case statewide. We're almost now in a poaching environment. At the same time, we're trying to appeal to young people to look at law enforcement as a fulfilling career. So I'm wondering why you feel, I know you have a reason, I'm just curious, why you feel what you state as a modest offering will be successful in the 8 new positions that we've allocated. Thank you.
So what I'll answer there is we like the system we have and the culture we have of starting most of our deputies at the jail and training them there before they are transferred to patrol. So we are not actually trying to fill all 8 positions. We're only trying to fill a handful of them to bring a little bit of experience to the road as we move into phase 2. The other part I'll say is, the other part of my product that I have is culture here at the Sheriff's Office. And I can tell you that I've had conversations with police officers and local agencies who are impressed by the culture of the Sheriff's Office, impressed by the way we do business. And I've been approached by several who I feel like, frankly, may even take a cut in pay to be part of culture and be part of what they see as something that's on the verge of greatness. As you know, there's a lot of faith restored within our partners locally with just seeing that the commissioners were committed to getting us to phase 2 and expanding our patrol services. So it's not going to fill all those positions, but we never wanted to try to fill all those positions without outside people because we don't want to have a change in our culture. We just want to enhance what we have.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Deputy. That makes eminent sense to me. And I'm really delighted to hear you talk about being on the precipice of greatness relative to other agencies, enforcement agencies. That's my sense also, and it's pretty clear you do have our commitment, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Commissioner Bozovich, you had your hand raised and dropped it. Are you still in the queue?
I was going to move approval of the order.
Then I just before I take that motion, a couple of things very quickly. And Chief, you mentioned a handful. 8 is a little bit more than a handful. Before I entered elementary school in Oregon, I was raised in the British school system, and teachers over there teach you all kinds of weird things like, what does a handful mean? Well, a handful means either 4, but in some circumstances 5. So I'm taking it literally that we were talking about 4 or 5, not the entire 8.
This is America.
We are in America now, yeah. So then the second thing is that you talk about excellence and in the department and excellence in the culture. One thing that we always look at is the focus and the attention to behavioral health issues that our Sheriff's Department seems to have more keenly than other departments that I'm aware of. And I think, for somebody who's entering the law enforcement career, to me, it seems that a Sheriff's Department like this would be a wonderful place to not just do the legal elements of enforcing the law, but actually improving the lives of people in our community. And I really appreciate the way our Sheriff's Department does focus on that. So then, without any further questions from the board, Commissioner Bozovich, I'll entertain a motion.
So I'd like to move approval of Order 22040506 in the matter of delegating authority to the Sheriff and the Labor Relations Manager for a lateral signing bonus of time management hours for external deputy sheriff applicants.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Commissioner Burney. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to say, great job, Chief Deputy and Sheriff. And I want to give some appreciation for the culture you all have developed in the Sheriff's Office, because that culture allowed you to have the trust of the Lane County Peace Officers Association to agree to do this, because it is a matter of bargaining, to offer these kind of incentives. And that's one of the reasons why the labor relations manager is in there, because we have to have their agreement to make this sort of additional offer. But it's a very small incentive, because I've talked with people from other agencies. We do have a great reputation for culture within the department, and people want to work there. It's one of the reasons we've hung on to people. It's just unfortunate that as a society, we have spent a couple years denigrating local law enforcement, and have done things that have actually been pretty threatening to people serving in those careers. The attempts to eliminate qualified immunity are just, really scary to anyone serving in local law enforcement, where they could lose their house, their children's, college funds and everything else for simply performing the duties of their office in accordance to the rules. It doesn't allow them to act outside the law. It only protects them when they're acting within the department procedures and in accordance with the law. So I just want to say that I really appreciate what you're doing. I really hope we can continue to keep that culture going. And you guys are exemplary at serving the public. And I just want to say you have my full support moving ahead with this program.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussion to the motion? I'm seeing none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0 with Vice Chair Trieger excused absent. Then thank you, Chief Wilkerson, and please pass the thanks along to everybody else who helped prepare this report. We'll look forward to the result being success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You all have a great afternoon.
Then moving along to item 8, but before we get to item 8, Mr. Mokrahajski, we have an 11 o'clock time certain, which we will adhere to. This would be improper, I believe, to move that up, because some people are counting on the 11 o'clock time certain. Some people set their watches by it. So can we move, after we've looked at County Council, Ms. Mokrahajski, do we have need for executive session today?
We do not.
We have no executive session. We've not given any assignments. Then I'll look, Mr. Mokrahajski, I'm going to come back to you to skip past item 9B. Well, after you've done item 9A, but then skip past that and see if there's any further business before we get to 11 o'clock time certain. So we don't have to recess and come back at 11 o'clock. Probably won't happen. So County Council, item 8A, announcements. Mr. Dingle, are you with us?
I am with you, Chair, and I have no announcements.
That's what you said earlier today, and I was wondering if anything had changed in the last hour and a half. So thank you. Then moving along to item 9A, Mr. Mokrahajski. We are
Thank you, Chair.
Announcements.
Yeah, just a couple of very brief things. We're wrapping up the proposed budget process. As the board knows, I will propose the budget for next year to the budget committee, comprised of the 5 commissioners and 5 appointed residents in the community, the first week in May. So we've gone through all of our department meetings and in pulling together the final adjustments to the proposed budget. We're also working on finalizing the strategic plan, which will come back before the board in short order for final adoption. Yesterday, we had a 3-hour retreat. A number of our leaders, including myself, Mr. Rickoff, Ms. Gray, Mr. Adams, who's taking on a new role as policy director for Lane County, and Mr. Manella, spent 3 hours with some key staff at the city of Eugene in what we had billed a retreat focused on updating the shelter and homelessness strategy investments that the county and city of Eugene have agreed to pursue over the last several years, included the Eugene city manager, assistant city manager, a couple other staff there. Kate Budd also did a lot of the facilitation and coordination information sharing on that. So it was really, really good time spent with the city of Eugene on continuing to coordinate, advance, strategize, reflect on the work that's been done and where we've made progress, as well as where there's continued gaps in the system of serving and ultimately serving individuals struggling with homelessness and ultimately reducing the number of people that are experiencing homelessness on a regular basis. We look forward to, we have another meeting, I believe tomorrow or Thursday with the city of Eugene and the Eugene Chamber to talk about a community engagement process in developing a sort of broader set of strategies and goals that the community can be aware of and support related to efforts to reduce homelessness in the community. So looking forward to that. And of course, as the board knows, we have invited and continue to have conversations with the city of Springfield about partnering and becoming part of that partnership that Eugene and Lane County have built so that we can really leverage all of our resources to tackle this issue. And we've had a number of conversations. Mr. Rickoff and I met late yesterday with the city manager in Veneta. I've communicated with the city manager in Coburg about the challenges that our rural communities are facing. We know that we're seeing this in the metro area, but now we're seeing more and more challenges in our rural communities related to mental health issues, and particularly law enforcement in our rural communities, or in the case of Veneta, our sheriff's office that's on contract with the city of Veneta to provide local law enforcement services that are engaging with individuals, more and more individuals with mental health issues. And of course, we know that law enforcement is not specifically trained historically to deal with those situations. And so we've used models like Cahoots and other skilled behavioral health specialists to do de-escalation and triage individuals that are experiencing mental and behavioral health crises on the streets. So just wanted to share that with the board. You know, this work we all are spending a lot of time on. We recognize it's arguably the biggest challenge that our county and each of the communities within Lane County are facing, between homelessness, lack of affordable housing, and behavioral health issues. So we continue to do that coordination and collaboration work with our city, nonprofit, and private sector partners. I think that is everything. I just wanted to no action or really big things, but just a brief update on some of the issues that we're dealing with. And of course, look forward to the kickoff of our budget process, where we get to dive in more depth on these issues. So happy to answer any questions if you have them, but that's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mulgrew. Before I look at the queue, and I don't see anybody in it yet, I just want to commend you for your proactive stance and your proactive work toward ever greater coordination, in particular with the city of Eugene, because they have wonderful programs in the city of Eugene, and quite often they could be converged a little bit more closely with what the county is doing and the Board of Health is doing. And I think that we're seeing great progress in that direction. Additionally, Mr. Mulgrew, what seems to be a renewed interest in our business community through the Chamber of Commerce and the members of the Chamber of Commerce, understanding and realizing and being proactive in the fact that they can be a significant part of our approach to addressing homelessness in our community. You know, I recently spent a couple of days in San Diego, and I looked and looked and looked and looked for homeless camps in San Diego, and I couldn't find any. Now, I didn't go to the East County, but I think it's interesting to see what is going on in other communities, and getting a unilateral approach between multiple jurisdictions and the business community, as well as always with our nonprofits. Once again, my commendation to you, Ms. Mulgrew, for being proactive in this area. I still see no other hands raised, so I've got a question for you. What is the ongoing discussion regarding in-person meetings? Is that something you want to talk about right now, or both for the budget committee? I understand the initial budget message will be kind of a hybrid meeting, but what's happening with in-person meetings?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Happy to touch on that. We, as we talked about at last week's board meeting, and we are actively working. I believe that we're targeting, let me just look real quick at my calendar, April 26th. Is the board is down on April 19th. You have a meeting next week, but the meeting after that on April 26th, we are planning to have that meeting in person and hybrid. So there will be opportunity for people to join virtually. Our plan, our tentative plan, is to have that meeting in person in the board's conference room. This is on the second floor of the Public Services Building on 125 8th Street. As we noted last week, and I shared pictures with commissioners from Harris Hall, which is the board's typical in-person room that holds many people. There's seating for well over 100 people in Harris Hall. It is currently under construction. And if you saw the pictures that I sent, it's really under construction. So it's not able to be occupied currently. We do expect that that Harris Hall will be available by the end, I believe by the third week of May, is the intent to get back into Harris Hall. That's what we're planning on at this stage, but that we will be beginning on April 26th. Our plan again is to be in person in the board conference room. So the board conference room, just so the public and those watching understand, is a smaller room. It's got a conference table, and it can accommodate about 10 to 12 people around the table, and then there are chairs lined around the wall. We will set it up so that we will allow for public comment in person there, as well as public comment virtually. We'll have an overflow room if there are folks, that can't be fit in that room specifically. So that's our plan, Chair, is for the board meeting on August 26th to be in person.
Well, thank you for that, Ms. Mograski, and thanks for moving as swiftly as prudently possible in getting us face to face with the public and with each other, for that matter. I love that conference room. If you, for people who've not been in there, if you're in that conference room, you get a view through the window, a grove of giant sequoia trees that far outdate the building that wraps around them. It really is a wonderful place to conduct a meeting, a wonderful setting. I am personally looking forward to getting in there, Ms. Mograski. Anything else then? Then we'll move along. Once again, we're not going to start the 11 o'clock time certain until 11 o'clock out of consideration for the people who are planning to set their watches by it. So we'll move down the list a little bit to, without objection, let's look at Commissioner's business. Any announcements from the Commission? Oh, come on, you can do better than that. I see no announcements. Then I'll ask this, I'll mention this, that, I was absent on family affairs last week, and a couple of things occurred last week. A couple of votes occurred last week without my presence. One of the votes ended up being a 2-2 tie, which failed the motion. And that was on the governance for the Homes for Good. And I guess I'm gonna have a question on that is, how can we reinvigorate that in order to let me get a vote on it? That's a question with Commissioner Burney.
Oh, thank you, Chair Farr, because I actually had intended, it's my understanding that that vote was a 2-2 vote, which meant the motion failed, and that related to the governance structure change at Homes for Good. Is that correct? Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly, yes.
Well, it's my understanding, and I've not done this, but it's my understanding that as a member of the majority on that instance, I can ask for the board to revisit that vote. And if in fact that is my prerogative, I would make that request. And let me tell you why I make that request. It was brought to my attention I believe it was September 21st, when I was chair, that this board did in fact approve and adopt that change in governance structure. I had forgotten that when it came last week, and no one mentioned that in the discussion, that what we in fact were voting on was codifying in Lane Manual the changes to the Homes for Good governance structure that we had already, as a Board of Commissioners, approved September 21st. So given that, that's why really with integrity for our previous decisions, I have to see if there is an interest. I am interested in asking the board to reconsider the motion which failed last week. Does that make sense, Chair?
It does, Commissioner, and since there was no majority on that vote, it's the prevailing side of the vote. Anybody on the prevailing side in a 2-2 vote, you were in a failed motion, you would be on the prevailing side. So
Commissioner Bozovich and I were on the prevailing side of that vote.
Yeah, and if that is your intention, then perhaps we could cover that under other business.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Further down the agenda.
Okay.
No, if that's your intent, I wanted to bring it up right now just to really to see if there's any way we could reinvigorate the discussion on that, because we had lengthy discussions really over the course of a number of years on it.
Well, then I will do that under other business, Chair. I apologize. And the other reason I would want to is you weren't participating in that vote, and I know you have strong feelings.
And you know, that was for me to attend family last week. It was my personal choice, and with that, you know, I accept whatever consequences come with that. So, but that being said, I'll give you a glimpse when we get to other business to see if that is something that you still have decided to do. Further announcements from the board. Okay, and then do we have any future board assignment requests? I see none. Then let's go to a, you know, Mr. Mokraski, I'm going to not review assignments until after item 9B is completed, because there may be assignments that arise from that. Maybe not, but there might be. So we'll move along directly to item 13, which is other business for today's meeting. Other business. And with that, I believe, Commissioner Burney, you have your hand raised.
Yes. Without enumerating the reasons or rationale, I would like to ask the board to reconsider the vote it made on the item last week. And I apologize, I can't.
Chair Farr?
Yes, Ms. Jones.
This is Diana. If I may, Chair or Commissioner Burney and Chair Farr, the order number you're asking for reconsideration on is order number 22-03-29-12.
Uh-oh.
I'll call it the -12 then. Okay, Commissioner Burney. And I believe the appropriate thing to do would be make a motion to reconsider, which would require a second.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second. No, restate it if you like. I'm sorry if I jumped in too soon.
No, that's okay. I appreciate it because I don't have, Ms. Jones, could we do this together? I would like to see if the board would reconsider
order number 22-03-29-12.
In the matter of, see how well we're orchestrated, in the matter of making changes to Lane Manual to reflect the change in the board structure of Homes for Good as this body had approved at our September 21st Board of Commissioners meeting.
Now I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded. I'm going to call it the March 29th, 2022-12 motion order that is being reconsidered at this time. And now a majority vote in the affirmative would reverse the decision that was made or not made, the motion that failed by non-majority in the last meeting. It would reverse that and actually pass that motion if this was successful in its passage. So discussion to that motion, Commissioner Bozovich.
So I hate to bring procedure into this, but the motion to reconsider is a motion to bring back on the table.
Yeah.
So positive vote on this motion will put the motion back on the table. So we have to have two votes. The first one to bring it back. The second one, if we're successful in bringing it back, then we would be in discussion of the original motion again.
Thank you, Commissioner, that I'll quit pretending to be an expert on Robert's rules. I can defer. So the passage of this motion would in fact put it back on the table for discussion, at which point there would be a motion to pass. Commissioner Burney.
Well, first off, I want to thank Commissioner Bozovich because this is not the first time he's helped me navigate through what the appropriate process is. Is it, and I just have a question in this regard, is it correct that if one is to bring up a motion for reconsideration or whatever you said, Commissioner, that it has to be done at the next Board of Commissioners meeting? Thank you. Thank you. That's why I did this. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thanks, Chair Burnett. And I've always considered that basically making it an extension of the previous meeting, since it really is an adjacent. So then we have a motion to reconsider to place the -12 from March 29th on the table. Any further discussion to that motion? I see none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes 4-0 with Vice Chair Trigger excused absent. Then the -12 from March 29th. Anybody who's watching this online or on in any way you may be watching it, you can go back to the agenda from March 29th and click on View Items on the -12, and it will bring up this entire item. Then it is on the table for discussion. I will open the discussion to the motion or to the retabled motion. I see nothing. Then do I have a motion? Commissioner Buck.
I'll move approval of Order 22-03-29-12 in the matter of amending Lane Manual Chapter 65 to establish provisions for appointing positions to the Commission of the Housing Authority and Community Services Agency of Lane County, DBA Homes for Good.
I second the motion I thought I made, but that Commissioner Buck made.
Then it is moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Burney to move the March 29th, 2022, that is the 22-03-29-12 motion order. Discussion to the motion. Sorry, I stumbled over that. I think you know what I meant. Commissioner Burney.
I just wanted to say that I still feel strongly about the points I made at our last week's meeting. I still had those questions, but when I realized the reason I requested reconsideration is when I realized that I was actually voting on the wrong thing. I thought I was voting on something we had already approved, and all I was voting on last week, or was simply making those, codifying the changes in Lane Manual that we had already approved. So I just wanted to explain that. Doesn't mean I thoroughly agree with the structure, but in fact, that is the structure we approved. And for consistency and integrity, I feel that's only right, and we shouldn't tie the hands of that agency in moving forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. And I see no further discussion. I'll say that I've heard Commissioner Bozovich, you've talked about this frequently, about that boards should not be appointed. Boards of magnitude should be elected officials. And I think that's a part of the discussion that probably I missed last week. And you point out sometimes the LTD board, for instance, which is appointed by the governor, is not elected, and yet they make pretty substantive decisions with public money. So with that, I see no further discussion of the motion. I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
Nay.
Passes 3-1 with Vice Chair Trigger absent excused. Thank you, board. Thank you, Commissioner Burney, and thank you to the entire board for reconsidering that. We'll move directly along then. The only other item we have, we'll get back to other business, I think, again, after the 11 o'clock time certain to see if anything further erupts, shall we say. And also look to the review of assignments following the 11 o'clock time certain. Mr. Mokrisi, do you have any other business prior to the time certain?
No.
Then I think we will have a brief recess. At the sound of my gavel, the board will be in recess until promptly at 11 a.m. We'll go into the time certain. So let's get back here about 2 or 3 minutes till for an 11 o'clock start on the time certain. Commissioner Burney.
Chair, could we mute ourselves and turn off our cameras and stay on this thing?
Ms. Jones, is that appropriate? Can we do that?
Yes, please do. Please do not log off.
Then just this admonishment, no, it's not admonishment, precaution. But remember that we're still basically on video then. Ms. Mokrisi, anything you'd like?
You may mute your cameras and your microphones both.
Very good. Ms. Mokrisi, anything before we enter into recess?
Nope, seeing a few.
Then at the sound of my gavel, we are recessed until 11 a.m. regular board meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. Welcome back, and checking our attendance list, we are all present. Mr. Mokrahajski, we have an 11 o'clock time certain, which is order and resolution 22-04-05-07 in the matter of authorizing financing of full faith and credit bonds and related matters. And you have a panel today consisting of Mr. Tyndall, Ms. Moody, and others. We'll say this, that our Finance and Audit Committee received this presentation already, and it's scintillating. I'll tell you what, it takes me back to the days when I was sitting on House Revenue, where every moment. This is really, Robert, I'm looking forward to hearing it again. So, Mr. Mokrahajski, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panel.
Well, without further delay, let's have Robert Tyndall take it away and walk through the presentation for you.
Morning, Chair Farr, Commissioners. Thank you for being able to present to you today. Again, Robert Tyndall, County Treasurer, my role today. As mentioned, I am joined today by Christine Moody, the Budget and Financial Planning Manager, and Carol Samuels, the county's Municipal Advisor from Piper Sandler Company. The discussion today is focusing on authorizing the issuance of new debt in the amount of the county's unfunded actuarial liability, UAL, which our last estimate was about $270 million, but we'll get that updated. I don't want to steal Carol's thunder in her presentation, but I do want to provide a high-level summary to set the stage of what you could be listening for, should be listening for as county commissioners, because there is a board order for a decision at the end of this. So we're talking about pension obligation bonds, POBs, which are bonds issued by local governments to fund public employee pension obligations. And POBs are a potential way to lower costs of pension funding when there's a high unfunded actuarial liability, like the county has. So public employers like Lane County can benefit if the returns on investments of bond funds are greater than costs of borrowing, okay? Issuing bonds at a lower rate of interest, and then we deposit the proceeds into PERS in a side account. It may reduce the cost for the county if the rates of return on bond proceeds deposited are greater than the borrowing cost. So, and Carol will talk a lot about this, but I just wanted to lay the foundation here of what we're talking about and why. So, and there are other factors that will affect the rate of potential risks and rewards of pension obligation bonds that she will discuss today. So please note that if you do approve the order before you today as well, that it would only authorize staff to move forward with the pension obligation bonds if at the time of the sale, the rates that we can get are 4.5% or lower, because there is analysis that Ms. Samuels, will talk through today at different interest rates and talking about the potential risk and liability with those. So I just want to be clear with that. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Samuels, and she'll give the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everybody. I am going to share my screen with a presentation that some of you have seen before, I believe. If someone could tell me whether or not they're seeing the big screen version. Yes, okay, fantastic. But as Robert said, this is both very complicated, which is why we're walking through a fairly lengthy presentation that I don't mean to be a lecture. If you have questions, please interrupt me as I go. But on the one hand, it's very complicated. On the other hand, it's actually very simple. And there's a lot of noise around PERS and a lot of issues that we're not going to go into today. But the main purpose of a pension obligation bond, also known as a POB, is that if you can borrow at a low rate and send the money to PERS and have them earn more on average than your cost of funds, then that profit can be used to reduce your overall pension funds cost. So it's actually, again, there's a lot of noise, but fundamentally that's the headline, and that's what you have to keep in mind. Couple of
pardon my interruption. This is Chair Farr. Just for procedurally, you stated that we can interrupt you, and I'll state to the board that if we do need to do so, let's do it in the form of a queue, and I'll keep an eye on the queue. So Ms. Samuels, continue. I'm sorry.
No worries. I appreciate that. So how do you go about doing this? Well, first of all, under federal tax law, this is not like a borrowing that you just did for your facilities. Under federal law, this is not for capital. So you would have to sell these bonds on a taxable basis, which means that interest rates are going to be higher than what you would typically borrow at. And unfortunately, even today, interest rates have been going up. Right now, we're projecting borrowing rates of about 4%. Last summer, we did a bunch of pension bonds and they all locked in a rate of 2.5 or lower. So does show you the speed with which interest rates are rising. But as Robert stated, if you approve the resolution, it has a maximum rate of 4.5. Once you sell bonds, you take the money and you send it to PERS. PERS then invests the funds in something called a side account, which is really a fancy name for a savings account that is invested with the rest of the PERS fund, but is held on behalf of Lane County and is amortized over a 20-year period, meaning that it's drawn down in accordance with a schedule over 20 years, and that drawdown is used as a direct offset to your current payroll rates. Over the course of the past 20 plus years, over 150 Oregon municipalities have issued these bonds, including the county itself in 2002. And the good news is that nearly all have done really, really well, including the county. However, that is not always the case, and that's why we have this fairly lengthy presentation. So, despite the recent run-up in interest rates, which you can kind of get a grasp for, this graph looks back all the way to 1996. The last time you did a borrowing was in 2002, and you borrowed at 7%. So that was pretty high. Relatively, we're at all-time lows, but we are starting to see interest rates go up. That's the environment we're in. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is what has PERS done with regard to their investment track record. And their investment track record has actually been very, very solid over the past 50 years, going to 2020, which is the latest data we have. They've actually earned over 10%. That's a long time. You're not going to be investing a side account over 20 years. So really a more relevant measurement is this one. And even though it only goes through 2015, what it's measuring is the average return on side accounts between 2004 and 2015. Why is that time period relevant? Because it includes losing 27% in 2008. Despite that massive loss, we see a return over this period of over 8%. And if I were to expand it through 2021, my guess is it would be higher than that. Final point on this slide, and then I'll pause because I see Commissioner Burney had a question. The 1-year earnings rate from February is over 16%. That's because in 2021, the fund earned over 20. So let me pause there.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't interrupt, but I was given permission. So you had a chart, a longitudinal chart that showed interest rates?
Yep.
Do you have the same chart so we can compare it against PERS interest rate, you know what I'm saying?
Earnings?
Yeah, earnings, thank you.
That's this. It's
Yeah,
really hard to see.
Well, so you don't have a chart so that we could see the relationship, or if there is one, between changes in interest rates and at the very same time changes in PERS earnings?
I do not.
Okay.
It wouldn't be that hard to craft that. Sometimes when interest rates are going down is when earnings are going up. That is not always the case, obviously.
Right. So I think what I hear you saying is interest rates are still relatively low, but we all know they're going up. I mean, they're going up, and we don't know how high they're going up, but they're going up. The Fed has signaled that most definitely. Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, one last question. If this body decided to move forward with this proposal, how quickly would this occur? Because as you've stated, and as we know, interest rates are actively going up.
So we have a timeline at the end of this, but the goal would be to put this together in time to send funds to PERS in June.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks.
Okay. If you want to do this, under Oregon law, there is now a requirement that frankly is a new requirement, but is very prudent practice. And you did this back in 2002. You are now required to obtain a third-party analysis of the probability that this effort is going to be successful. And the third party has to be someone not like me, but someone who is not associated with the financing, gets no benefit from the financing. As part of that, the county entered into a contract in partnership with a group of other jurisdictions who are all in the same place as you, with Echo Northwest, to conduct this analysis. And their analysis is quite lengthy, but if you want to boil it down to a single snapshot, it is this. What is the probability that the net present value, meaning what it's worth to you today, is more than zero? What that means in English is what's the probability at various interest rates that you're going to make money on this transaction? And they looked at 3 different interest rates. This was conducted in January. 2.5% TIC is our word for the internal rate of return, or the APR. It's basically your borrowing rate of 2.5%, 3.5%, and 4.5%. At 2.5%, this may be obvious. If you can borrow at 2.5% and send it to PERS, who has a history of earning somewhere between 8% and 10%, your odds are pretty darn good, over 90%, that you will end up making money as compared to costing money. At 3.5%, it's more like 84%, and at 4.5%, it's about 74%. So even at 4.5%, your odds are pretty good. Of course, that does mean that there's a 25, 26% probability that you won't make money at 4.5%, but 3 out of 4 That's probably pretty good. On the other hand, there are other risks as well. I'll go into some of these in more detail, but just to give you the headlines, timing of earnings matter. So if you think we are about to head into a major market crash, similar to, say, what happened in 2008, you absolutely do not want to do this, because we worked with a thankfully small group of jurisdictions in the fall of 2007 who borrowed, and then 3 months later, the fund was down 30%. They actually have not recovered despite 15 plus years of positive returns. They have not recovered. They are still in the red. So if you think that's the direction the market is going, not a good time to do this. The second consideration is these rate credits, the drawdowns that PERS gives you, will be trued up every 2 years based upon the actual performance of the side account, which means that you're going to have volatility, more volatility in your payroll rates than you would if you did nothing, because not only do you have to focus on the PERS rates themselves, but the side account is like doubling down on the bet. And I use gambling terminology here intentionally, because this is a bet. It's a bet that you're going to do better. And when you have two things in the PERS fund, where the PERS fund itself, if it has a bad year, is going to have your payroll rates go up, simultaneously, your side account, if it has a bad year, will cause the credit you receive to go down. So it's doubling down on the investment performance. Of course, the opposite is also true. In a good year, you will see better returns than would be the case if you did nothing. It's also true that payroll growth matters in terms of how much you're allowed to draw down each year. So that can add to volatility, with the summary being, when you do this, your payroll rates are going to be more variable than would otherwise be the case, which is why we recommend strongly that you set up a reserve to offset fluctuations if you decide to go down this path. Little more on timing, and to give you an example, these are 3 school districts that I have not named, but I imagine you could figure out at least one of them, real life circumstances, who were in different borrowing programs and have had different results. School District A is my favorite school district story. They issued twice in 2002 at a 5.6% TIC, and in 2003 at an even higher TIC. They issued nearly $500 million, and they have saved more money than any other school district because they had a period of 5 really solid investment years following right before the 2008 recession, and then thereafter had strong investments as well. School District B has also saved a fair amount of money, but not as much, because they issued later, even though their borrowing rates have been lower. And then there's School District C that keeps me humble about this. They're one of those, as I mentioned before, who borrowed in the fall of 2007. We went into an immediate investment free fall, and they not only have not saved money, they've actually lost money. Let's look at the numbers specifically. School District A, again, borrowed twice. They borrowed this amount. And the most graphic example of how they're doing is the valuation of their side account as of the latest data we have, and I apologize for my cat making noise. As of December 31st, 2020, which is the latest official data we get from PERS, their side account was worth, after 18 years of drawdowns, was worth almost as much as they deposited originally. Why is that? It's because investment earnings outpaced drawdowns such that to date, they have already saved 300 plus million, and we project that they will save an additional 150 million before the bonds are paid off. School District B has done just fine, but nowhere near as dramatic. They borrowed 142 million, they've saved 40, and we anticipate they'll save approximately 3.7 more. But again, the case that keeps me humble is School District C that borrowed $40 million. They've already lost 2.6, and we anticipate before the bonds are paid off, they will lose an additional 7.5. This does not take into account 2021 strong earnings, so that will help to a degree. But again, if 2022 is a bad year, that may offset it. So our expectation is that School District C is not even going to get to break even. So how do the numbers look for you guys? Well, this first chart is overwhelming, but I want to show you how the pieces fit together without going into any of the specific numbers. Hopefully you can see this. The way this is organized is at the top, we've divided this up by valuations, which are produced by PERS every year. And we're showing you the 2007 valuation and then breaking it into the most recent valuations. And the reason we're showing you 2007 is that was the year before the crash, when our situation was as good as it gets. So the UAL for the unfunded actuarial liability, which is the shortfall that was allocated to Lane County of the system's unfunded actuarial liability, was actually a surplus in 2007. Why? Because you had done a bond issue in 2002. The system actually had $1 billion shortfall, but your portion of it was actually in surplus because you had done a bond issue and you experienced the exact same thing that School District A experienced. Well, fast forward to the latest data that we have, and all of a sudden, your shortfall is $283 million in the positive. So it's a huge liability. It is offset by the fact that you guys created a side account with cash last year, I think, maybe the year before, so that your net liability as of 2020 is $270 million. But in contrast to this, what you're seeing here is proof positive of what happens when the system loses 27% in 2008, and then through legislative and judicial inaction, we took a long time to start making payments on it. In terms of how that affects your payroll rates, you'll see down here, these are the rates, percentage of payroll that you were paying back in 2007. So about 12.25% for tier 1, tier 2, a little lower for OPSERP at 10.7. As of the 2020 valuation, and this is not today's rates, these are rates that are projected for the 23-25 biennium, those rates are projected to more than double. Your current rates are actually here. So it's actually a little better than what you're paying right now. But again, this is translating these massive deficits into what percentage of payroll you are paying. And this does not include the 6% pickup, nor does it include debt service on your existing bond. You do have an existing bond. You borrowed in March of 2002, you borrowed about $229 million, and you borrowed at a whopping 7%, which I would go nowhere near today. But nevertheless, while we cannot isolate how much you have saved, because back in 2002, they did not use the side account mechanism, so there is no tracking. I can tell you that for those types of jurisdictions that had side accounts, borrowing in 2002 was the golden ticket. So I have no doubt you have saved many millions of dollars through this borrowing program. Okay, so what might this look like for you? We have run both a 4%, which is today's rates, sensitivity, and we've run a 4.5% analysis, which is currently the maximum that is in your resolution form. We ran 3 different cases, and let me just say there are a million different combinations that we could run, but these seem to be the 3 rational approaches to look at. The first case is what we call the base case. In the base case, we use exactly the assumptions that PERS uses in their actuarial models, which are not very realistic, but nevertheless give you kind of the control case. And that is that the system earns 6.9% each and every year. So the assumption is you borrow it for, and every year you earn 6.9. I don't actually need to run those numbers to say, okay, that's arbitrage, legal arbitrage, by the way, and you're going to save money. So what we identify is that you borrow about $270 million, and you would save about $100 million on that basis. Total with $63 million on a present value basis. So that's real money. In terms of translating it into what effect it has on your annual payroll, we estimate that the reduction in your payroll rate would be about 14.8%, but then you need to take into account the debt costs, which as a percent of payroll is about 11.9, leaving a reduction net of about 2.9% annually. Okay, but we know the idea of earning 6.9% each and every year is ridiculous. That is not happening. So we ran 2 other scenarios. This I'd call the school district A scenario, where you assume you borrow in 2002, you have strong years for 5 years, and then you lose a ton of money. Well, as school district A demonstrated, in that case, you actually do even better by a lot. You would save about double what the base case would show. Okay, do I think that's going to happen? No, I don't think that's realistic either. So then we run the case that everybody cares about most, which is the school district C case. What happens if you go out, you do this, you immediately lose 27%, and then for the next 15 years, you earn really solid returns? Well, despite what I told you about school district C, in that case, you still save money. Nowhere near as much, but you save. And your legitimate question is, wait a minute, you just said that school district C is in the hole and you expect it to be in the hole. And the key difference is we are assuming a borrowing rate of 4% here. The actual borrowing rate that school district C invested in was 5.67%. And that is the fundamental difference. I was surprised, I have to tell you. When we first ran these numbers, it's like, wait, that can't be. But in fact, based on our assessment, that's the case. So now let's look at 4.5, which is the rate that is currently built into your resolution. And the savings go down. Big surprise. They're still pretty healthy for the base case, $80 million, 198 in school district A case. You still save money even in the school district C case. This is much more like a break even. And there are years where your rate credit from PERS is not enough to cover the debt service. So there is volatility. These numbers are not hugely negative, and they are offset by 10 years where they are negative. This emphasizes what I was saying before about having a reserve is a really smart move if you go down this path. But to me, this is reassuring. Is it a guarantee? It is not. It is not. I am not here to say that this is a slam dunk or anything close to it. There is a fair amount of risk here. But I take comfort from the fact that at 4.5%, even in the worst circumstances we've seen in the past 20 years, you would not put the county in worse shape than it's in right now. Okay, so let's talk about the timeline. If you want to proceed, you have a resolution in your packet that you should adopt if you want to proceed. We then need to engage in getting estimates from PERS that they take up to 45 days to process. This is part of their administrative rule. The data they provide is actually going to be quite similar to the data we have run, but our analysis doesn't matter. Their analysis does, and they will tell you exactly what the amount is and how much your payroll rates would go down if you deposit that amount. So in this timeline, to get this done in June, what we have talked to Christine and Robert about is that that request would go in tomorrow. That is not free. So in terms of costs you might incur while we're waiting to be processed, that's somewhere between $1,250 and $1,500 that you won't get back if you decide later on you don't want to do this, or if interest rates go above that 4.5% rate. Between this month and June, we would spend time developing what we call the POS, the preliminary official statement. It's a prospectus that actually for you guys will be fairly fast to put together because you just borrowed earlier this year. So it would just be updating that. We would need to update your rating, and for an issue of this amount, 270 plus million, I would recommend we get 2 ratings. You currently have a single rating from Moody's Investor Service. I would recommend we get a second one from Standard & Poor's. So there is some process associated with that. Then the week of May 9th, we would schedule time for staff to talk to the rating agencies and also engage in due diligence conversations on the disclosure document. And then the goal is to have a bond sale the week of June 13th, close by the end of June. And PERS's policy is they will reduce your payroll rates the first of the month after receiving the deposit. So we don't have a ton of wiggle room here. If we miss this date, you won't see a reduction until August, but it would be sometime this summer based upon this timeline.
Ms. Samuels, pardon for interrupting. Commissioner Bozievich will be excused at 11:40 today, and I wonder if we could take a moment to see if Commissioner Bozievich, prior to your leaving, do you have anything you wish to add?
Pat, I was just texting you. I'm going to get somebody else to pick Elizabeth up, even though her flight's running early. This is too big and important of a discussion because I have grave concerns about our economy over the next 24 months.
Okay.
I think 4.5% is too risky, and I want to have this discussion as a board and pay attention. So I was just trying to text somebody to arrange for her pickup. So
very good.
So we'll deal with that. I'm going to stay for the duration. Thank you.
Very good. Now we're at 11:36 right now. We have a firm close at right around noon today. So let's continue.
So timing is perfect. I'm actually done with the formal presentation and I am happy to answer questions. So
thank you, Ms. Samuels. That was absolutely enthralling. You do a really good job of putting in human terms. People who don't do it for a living don't always understand the things you're talking about, but you made it very understandable. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
And let's move along to the queue. Any questions prior to my entertaining a motion? I'll bet there are. While I wait for the queue, there it comes. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. So we have 25 minutes to decide if we're going to risk $270 million of the public's money on the basis of guessing what the economy is going to look like. Do I have that correct?
I don't think we need that much time. Go ahead. If we're guessing.
Ms. Samuels, do I have that correct?
Well, I know that staff is eager to get feedback. I would not say you have only 25 minutes. It's a question of whether you want to hit this timeline. If you want to hit this timeline, then we're going to need a decision pretty quickly.
I understood.
So,
yeah. So if I may, is it your firm, Piper Sanders?
I think it should be called Piper Samuels, but it's actually Piper Sandler.
Well, as I look at the global reach of your firm, I doubt that they're going to call it Piper Samuels.
I know.
So investment banking, correct? In my, forgive me, I don't have your experience, not even close to it, but there's a bond sale. Do you receive dollars for placing that bond?
No.
So
to be clear, our compensation is tied to the bond measure, which is one of the reasons for the third party analysis. But we are your municipal advisor, so we don't place the bond. We just advise you on the sale.
No, I appreciate it, and I'm not critical. I'm just looking. So when you say the bond, the length of this bond would be 15 years, is that correct? 20. And in that 20 years, and I'm not suggesting any other third party wouldn't make the same amount of money, but in that 20-year period, how much of dollars of that bond process will go to the third party, in this instance, Piper Sanders?
So again, we are not the third party here. I believe the fee to Echo Northwest was something on the order of $2,500, but I don't think that's your question. I think you're asking how much we might make.
Right. Well, I'm used to, as a developer, making a good amount by building myself into the interest rate and building myself into the closing costs. I just am asking how this works.
And believe me, I am not defensive about this. I think these are the right questions to answer. I think I do not pitch these types of bonds because they frankly give me anxiety. So just know that feel free to ask me any question you want. I believe on the full amount, our fee is somewhere in the $150,000 to $200,000 range. That's not the biggest fee. The bigger fee is the underwriting fee, which might be as much as 1% that would be paid to an investment bank that actually sold the bonds.
So, and you would not be built into the interest rate. It's simply
it is built into the interest rate, yes. So the 4.5% includes fees. So that would not be on top.
I'm not trying to beat a dead horse. In 20 years, what would your firm make?
The only thing we would make is the upfront fee.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I'm anxious to hear what other commissioners say. I might want to come back, but thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Birding. I'm looking to the queue. Then I'll turn it to Commissioner Bozevich.
Thank you, Chair. And, yeah, 20 minutes to make a $270 million decision. And I know we got some of this information up front, but it wasn't really until the presentation that I really understood the issue of early losses in the 20-year time period. And as I look, 20 years out, I'm fairly optimistic that, over a long term, the American economy's done well and always has. But there are issues right now that with threats to our economic system that of global significance. If we push too far with the Russian-Ukraine situation and China, Solomon Islands, Taiwan, there's a possibility that Russia, China, and India will choose to make another currency the international exchange currency. And the US dollar takes a huge hit. I'll try and keep my language clean, but that one thing is sitting out there as a possible threat would make 2008 look like a little, small pothole in the road as we head off a cliff. The current climate economically of negative possibilities have, as I think of the doomsday clock, having grown up as a baby boomer, if you had an economic doomsday clock right now, it'd be 11:59 and 59 seconds. We are on the precipice of a huge economic downturn for multiple reasons, not just the international issues. It's also the money supply growth that's happened in this country, and what we're doing there. I just, for me, the next couple of years is incredibly scary to me economically. As we've seen this incredible boom in, once again, real estate prices are through the roof. If we see a huge economic downturn where people can't afford, $1 million houses, what happens to real estate? We're back in 2008 where everybody's over leveraged their houses and can't afford their mortgages. There's just so much uncertainty. It makes me extremely nervous to do this and look at that 4.5% as a level we can tolerate. I'd be, willing to pass something maybe with a much lower interest rate, which then I'm basically saying we're not going to do it because I don't think you can get a 3.5% interest rate in today's market. But to me, that's my comfort level right now. 4.5 is too risky for me. So that's kind of where my initial thoughts are, is I just, my crystal ball is not very cheerful for the near term economically, which means we're looking at school district C sort of losses if we make this investment. And I don't know if I can put the county at that kind of risk.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Any response or none needed on that one? Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the same doomsday outlook, but it does beg the question, do we have an economic report or something that kind of goes along with this to ensure that if we do this, we have some data behind it to ensure that we may come up with the various scenarios that were presented today? Because as it's presented right now, in all three scenarios, there really isn't a downside. But it does require some review of what we think is going to happen in the near future economically. And from what I'm reading from the state's economic outlook emails that they send everybody every couple weeks or once a month, things are looking pretty good, actually. So I'm curious. I know that I don't think that you as staff would present this to us if we felt like, or if you felt that this was like just not even in the ballpark for us to consider. I'm guessing you are bringing this to us now because you see a lot of potential here and have a rosier picture of the economy going forward. But I do believe that we would want some data behind that to alleviate any of these potential concerns.
I don't know, Robert or Christine, if you want to respond, but the Echo Northwest snapshot that I had one slide from is from a much lengthier economic analysis that I think gets to what you were seeking. So we can certainly circulate a copy of that if staff doesn't have it.
Chair Farr, Commissioner Buck, if I may, thank you, Carol, for also mentioning that. The Echo Northwest report was also included in your packet, so you should have a copy of that as well for additional reading. And just to be clear, this is, the staff did bring this forward as a recommendation, obviously, and this is different, as Ms. Samuels mentioned, compared to our bond refunding and new money that we did purchase, because there is this risk factor. And that is why we needed and wanted to present this before the board to provide direction and advice, because this is something that does need to be contemplated, because it's not as easy as just refinancing or refunding a bond.
Right. Thank you, Robert. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first, Ms. Samuels, I want to say I'm not grilling you, and I apologize for asking those pointed questions. Forgive me, my past is I'm always curious about third parties, dollars that are accept, but that's not what I'm. Thank you, Chair. While I don't know while my crystal ball is very cloudy and murky, I will say that I think you would agree, Ms. Samuels, but please tell me if you don't, that these are the dynamics in place in both the national and global economy are about as uncertain and chaotic as any period I've lived through. And in that context, I understand the critical nature of the delta between the interest rate, between, as you call it, legal arbitrage. And I think the definition of arbitrage, correct me, I'm probably wrong, but it relates to borrowing money and then investing the money you borrowed and having the delta be positive. So the risk is borrowing money, and the interest rate really is the barometer of how much risk we're willing to take. I'm guessing that because staff and your firm see interest rates rising, there is the sense that if this is going to happen, let's have it happen as soon as possible. Can you give me any confidence at all in what I see as just such uncertainty that, of course, does increase the risk of this type of move with the public's resource? Can you share anything that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and if I could provide investment certainty, I would probably not be doing this. My expertise is on interest rates and on the fixed income markets, and I can share that there is an expectation that interest rates are going to continue to rise. In fact, one of the Fed Reserve directors was testifying today about the fact that they are looking to liquidate a lot of the positions they currently hold in bonds, which should cause interest rates to go up further. There is now a discussion about the Fed raising rates on the short end of the curve by somewhere between 50 and 100 basis points in their next meeting. So from that perspective, there is a ton of noise about rates going up. Is that permanent? Probably not. Rates go up, they come back down, but it does suggest that in the short term, this may be as good as it gets from a borrowing perspective. On the investment side, I'm sorry?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. On the investment side, that is totally not my area of expertise, and it's why I don't give recommendations on whether this is a smart thing to do or not a smart thing to do, because I only have expertise in one side of the equation. This is why I have always been a proponent in getting a third party like Echo Northwest to come in and do an econometric analysis. And they went down to the ingredients of what is currently in the PERS fund and their asset allocation strategies, and then ran, continuing on the gambling terminology, they ran a Monte Carlo simulation of 10,000 scenarios to come up with those probability graphs that I showed. So do I take comfort from that? I do, because that's not my area of expertise. Is it a guarantee? It's not. And, if I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name, so I'm just going to call you Jay. If your scenario is accurate, then by all means, this could be a worse scenario than doing anything else. On the other hand, if Heather's scenario is more likely, Oregon is very strong economically right now. The unemployment rate data is as good as it's been. But is there certainty? I'm sorry, Joe, and I'll just call you by your first name. So.
You call me anything you want, we're good.
Anyway, there isn't, which is why this kind of transaction, which has saved jurisdictions, including Lane County, a boatload of money, does give me some level of anxiety. But it may be, if you don't take this opportunity, that the opportunity will evaporate to save some money on what is a sizable cost on your expenses.
Since we're doing first names here, thank you, Carol, and thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you. Just to kind of restate what we're talking about, you provided us with school districts A, B, and C. We're worried that we may be school district E, D, or Omicron. So I guess that's a discussion that we're having right now is like Dirty Harry said, do you feel lucky? No, that's not exactly how he meant it, but what's our pleasure at this point? Does anybody have to leave at noon today, by the way? Then we didn't have a 25-minute. We can make it 27 or 28 minutes even. So let's continue with further discussion. I don't know that any greater clarity can be achieved by further discussion. Mr. Mokrajewski, do you have anything you would weigh in on this with?
Well, I mean, I think we're looking for feedback from the board as you've started to provide. I think the questions and concerns that have been expressed are valid and good. We're bringing this to you, and I think it's important to note that approval, what we're asking for is authorization to move forward. So I think that we recognize that there's a window of opportunity, and it may be that window closes because rates go higher than we're comfortable, that push this deal out of the realm of reasonableness. So we're looking, I think, for authorization from the board to have the ability to move forward if the interest rate environment remains favorable. So that's the direction that we're looking at today. But I think your staff here, and I've had conversations with Robert and Christine about this. We're very mindful of all the things that you all are concerned about, and we share all of those concerns and wanting to make sure that, if we were to move forward with this bond proposal, that it would be in the short and long-term best interests of the taxpayers whose resources we're responsible to steward. So I think I appreciate the conversation, in the sentiment of, well, this is a 25-minute conversation, make a significant, it's really not that final decision that we're being asked to make today. We're asking you to weigh in on, are you comfortable with us continuing to move forward and pursue this proposal if that window of opportunity remains open, understanding that, it may close. The time frame may be such that we don't have the ability, we're not comfortable executing on this proposal. So I think we're trying to get that, both your feedback, your sentiments, and the parameters with which you're comfortable with us moving forward.
Excellent. And we've heard Commissioner Bozovich say that 3.5 is his threshold. And you're proposing a 4.5 threshold. Is that basically what I'm hearing as authorization from the board at this point? Does that sound about right? Okay. So,
Chair, I just want to make sure Robert was about to respond. My understanding is we were looking at a not to exceed 4.5. But Robert, do you want to weigh in on that?
Chair Farr, Mr. Mokrajewski, yes, that is correct. That's what I was going to say. And that was based on the upper end of the parameters of the report presented by Echo Northwest, with the probability having the greatest still at the max of 4.5%. But again, it could be at a different rate if the board so chooses for the maximum rate to move forward.
Thank you. And the rate's currently sitting at 4%, Ms. Samuels. Is that what I heard?
Okay. As of today, yeah.
And it is very volatile at this point in time. Okay, well, then we have as per Mr. Mokrajewski, we have a decision to make regarding the order that's before us with a number that we'd like to put in there as the upper threshold. Staff is recommending 4.5% as the upper threshold. Any discussion toward that? Bear in mind that when posterity looks at this, they'll look at the idiot who signed the order, and that would be me. So,
well, that's one vote in favor of doing this. As I'm reading the proposed motion, Mr. Mokrajewski, and if I'm reading this incorrectly, but what I see is just moving to approve the order authorizing financing and moving forward on that. bound by the board's previous decision about a 4.5 cap. Am I reading? So really, it's more than just exploring it. It's in fact moving forward. Is that correct or not?
Chair, Commissioner Burney, if I may. Yes, you are correct. If you approve this resolution, it will grant the county administrator or the county treasurer, the official, to proceed with selling bonds, getting the per site account up to based on that maximum rate. So we would continue to move forward. But at the time of the bond sale, which is later in June, that's where we get bids on what the rates are, what the market is willing to sell at that time. And that's when we would determine, based on the approved rate by the board, that's when it would be a no or no go decision based on the bids that came in.
Thank you. May I continue, Chair, or no?
Please continue, Joe.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Well, I've had 5 names thrown at me in the last 2 minutes. So, Ms. Samuels, given that time frame, and I don't know the schedule of when the Fed meets, but given that time frame, it seems to me that we'll, in all likelihood, be pushing that 4.5 threshold we're discussing, or you don't know.
So you remember that graph that showed rates going down pretty consistently from 1996 to today? There have been multiple, despite the fact that I claim expertise on interest rates, there have been multiple periods where I have been known to say interest rates are so low that they can only go one direction, only to see them go lower. So I think the trend is upward. Does that mean that we are only going to see a trajectory that is the opposite of the overall graph? I doubt it, because frankly, international turmoil often leads investors to say, stock market makes me very insecure, and they move their money to bonds. Over the course of the past week, interest rates have gone up 15 basis points and down 10 basis points. And today, not a good day, because the Fed governor actually opened his mouth unhelpfully. So they're up again today, but tomorrow?
Well, based on that,
within a band, 450 is achievable.
Or
maybe not.
Achievable or maybe not. Based on that, here are the things that to me are very clear. We don't know what's going to happen. And therefore, for what it's worth, trying to get a little closure to this, I would be comfortable moving this forward with the caveat that if interest rates went above 4%, 4, not 4.5, above 4% at the time, right, where it counted, when we actually were going to close a transaction, we would need this board's approval again. We would need again to revisit, because it's a volatile time and we're making a guess, and it may be an educated guess, but it's a guess nonetheless. And all the experts that I've spoken to, which has been about 3 in the last 2 months, have said they just don't. This is untraveled territory that these economies are now in, and that was before the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And for the board's sake, I do want to say Ms. Samuels is absolutely correct. You know, when you look at real estate or stocks or bonds, money is going to travel between those areas to whichever at the moment is the most stable and looks the most optimistic. So there's always that dynamic in place. Thank you.
So
please go ahead, Ms. Samuels.
if there were interest in pursuing Commissioner Burney's suggestion, we should talk about the actual process, because to logistically put something like that in place is possible mostly, but not with a guarantee unless you change the number in the resolution. So let me pause and see if there's interest enough in that idea that I should talk through logistically how that might play.
Thank you. I apologize. I just lost my battery. I may have lost the, no. Am I back? Okay, good. Sorry. Then, but we're at 4% right now. So, I mean, the likelihood of it staying at 4% is low, seems. But you don't know. Okay. Then, so Commissioner Burney is suggesting that we do give the approval with a caveat that we don't exceed 4%. And I see that Commissioner Bozovich would like to speak. Please go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. So, yeah, I want to try and, looking at the Echo Northwest report, they really don't make a prediction about the economy. They just talk about portfolio returns and predictions about possible returns for PERS and bandwidths of various investment returns. That's really, whatever we get in the bond markets, what we'll get, whether it exceeds 4.5% or not. That's whatever bonds are selling at that particular day, that we issue the bonds and sell them, under contract. The real thing that changes over time, interest rates may be going up, which I think is a pretty sure thing in the short term until the economy collapses. But the issue about what we're balancing that against is these return on these assets from public equity, including real estate, private equity, that portfolio that PERS holds, their return on their investments, which are based on usually what people think the economy is doing. And Commissioner Burney's correct. We are in such uncharted territory even before the conflict in Ukraine. COVID and the genie that got released from the bottle in Wuhan, we don't know if that's going to have a new surge or if a new variant comes out, how that's impacted our economy. We don't know how the recovery efforts put out by this government, which caused the explosion in our money supply, are going to ultimately impact the economy. Now we don't know how the possible food shortages of impacting basically Europe's grain belt with a war are going to have on the international economy, let alone the energy sector impacts we're having. There is a massive amount of risk in the world economy right now, and most of it's negative, not positive. I know the state's real rosy and feeling like they're going to be doing great, but that's just kind of the state doing an analysis of just how the state's doing against the U.S. or something. I don't think it takes quite into account a global picture. And I am real concerned that we are looking at, in the short term, returns that are going to be so negative on some of these assets, that even at 4%, we are going to lose significant money for the county by making this bonding, this side account. So I have real trouble moving ahead with this at this time. And I think 2 years from now, there may be a great opportunity to be a school district A again. But I think in this year, the most opportunities right now are you're going to be a school district C. And that's just my personal feelings and how unsure and how absolutely unpredictable the events of the last 2 years and the last 2 months have made economic forecasting. And you know, asset return and allocation assumptions, I just think are almost meaningless at this point. And I'm just having a real hard time putting this amount of funds at risk, even if we can guarantee a 4.5% return. That's just my personal feeling, because that's really we know interest rates are going to probably continue going up, but eventually they'll come back down to stimulate the economy, and because of lack of economic activity, if we have a recession, maybe even a depression that takes place. So that's let's wait and see what happens and maybe make this decision in 2 years. Although I won't be here though.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. After hearing everybody, it sounds like we need some additional time for discussion on this particular order and resolution. Since we know we won't have the audio and visual we have now. Yeah, I'm supportive of moving forward. I think if we hold it to 4%, it doesn't give our staff any room to really move through the process. And it will obviously come back to us after the issuance goes out and we get those bids back, and we'll have to review it at that time anyway. So it feels like now is the time to move on something. It's possible in a couple of months we won't have this opportunity and we don't know when it will come back. And it's possible we lose a considerable amount of savings in the meantime. But if there isn't enough people on the board here to come to an agreement on any particular scenario, it sounds like we should have the agenda team schedule this for some more time at a subsequent meeting, even though that will delay the timeline that's been presented today, which for me, I would rather not do. I'd rather move this forward. I had the benefit of hearing this presentation twice because I'm on the Finance and Audit Committee with the chair. And so I've had most of my questions answered, and it was very good to have two different people presenting it in two very different ways. That's very helpful. And I really feel like we could miss an opportunity. I think if we put a caveat of 4%, again, we're not giving our staff the opportunity to move forward when we'll have a second opportunity when it comes back to the board to say yay or nay.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Then let's look at the timing on this. If we do choose to not to delay a decision, kick the can down the road or step on the can and flatten it, is there a drop dead time on this? I mean, actually, it seems that about now is the drop dead time, isn't it? I mean, a decision subsequent to this is going to make it even more tentative. Am I correct in that?
So what makes this type of transaction time consuming is not the work on the side of the county, because frankly, the fact that you just sold bonds 2 months ago makes putting together a bond issue very quick. Right. The problem is that there is this unusual process that PERS requires that takes 45 days.
Which you outlined previously, so yeah. And so if we take 2 more weeks, then the process just takes 2 more weeks because the PERS board is going to have that same need for time.
Something you could consider if you are interested in moving this along is having staff submit the paperwork to PERS to start their process. Again, That comes at a cost, depending on how many scenarios you're interested in having PERS analyze, of about $1,250 to $1,500. You can then have a subsequent meeting where you decide on the interest rate, you decide whether you want to proceed or not, but at least that clock is moving.
Okay. So for a relatively small investment, we could start the clock rolling today, and then really actually, you know, pull the trigger, so to speak, subsequent to this, or pull the cork subsequent to this. Well, that to the board, that seems like a prudent approach for $1,500 per scenario. That's a relatively small amount for to give us a little bit of breathing room. What do you all say to that? Besides nothing. Commissioner Burney.
I would be for that. I want to, Ms. Samuels, after lots of tough questions, I want to really thank you for walking through this with us. It's not easy, but I think you also appreciate, hey, we're just trying to do the right thing and by the right thing. So thank you. If that's a workaround that you proposed to at least get the clock ticking that takes time, it seems that that's a minimal expense to the county if we're looking at $270 million. It gives us time to watch what's happening, right? With your expertise, interest rates, et cetera, which really completely define the risk. I'm supportive of that. And I'm also not gonna let my anxiety over the global economy and the chaos that's going on there to color my eyes from the fact that arbitrage is arbitrage, everything is relative, and if we can get a lower rate than PERS is getting back, we're in good shape. And I think that's the bottom line for the staff proposing this. So I can't imagine how not starting that process, if that's the only cost to the county, to keep our options open wouldn't be a positive thing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, then I don't see any real disagreement with that, Ms. Mokrahayski, and I guess we need some wording on an order or on a motion that would give you that instruction. Then just to say this, I ate an In-N-Out burger last week. It cost me almost $1,500 for lunch that day. So I gave you a moment of time there, Mr. Mokrahayski. What should we say? What order should we read?
I'm thinking about that because it sounds like you don't want to move forward with the order, but you'd like the TikTok. I think what you could do is just a motion to direct the county administrator and staff to submit request to PERS for scenarios related to this bond sale that we could then report back to. I'm not exactly clear what the timing of that would be when we could bring that back to the board, but I think that's what, if you're interested in pursuing what Carol suggested, that would be my recommendation, is that you make a motion to direct the county administrator to submit the necessary paperwork to PERS and consider the options available related to, or what the impact of a bond sale would be on PERS rates to the county prior to execution of the sale itself.
Very good. Ms. Samuel, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, first of all, before I go any further, I have been so derelict in my duty. I do have a colleague who currently does not have his face showing. I hope he hears me. Brendan Watkins, yeah. I apologize, Brendan, for not introducing you. And he was the one who made the presentation to the Finance Committee that Commissioner Book was talking about earlier. So apologies.
It's good to see you again, Brendan. Your head's been fairly mobile during this entire discussion. I've been watching you a little bit. So.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. My connection's been kind of shaky. So I've been like logged off and logged on. several times. So it's probably best I'm not the key speaker.
Well, this was a little bit more robust than the discussion we had at Finance and Audit perfunctorily. So then Mr. Mokrahisi has suggested a motion. And I'm sorry, Ms. Samuels, go ahead.
What I was going to say to the motion is, I don't believe that the PERS analysis that we are going to receive is going to inform this discussion in any material way, because the analysis they provide is virtually identical to the analysis we provide. It's just that it's a required step, and they reserve the right to take 45 days to produce it. So my recommendation to you would be to schedule another session sometime in the next month to take a look at the specifics, let that clock run, let staff continue to get information to you, and we can come back and give you a report on the state of the market and, you know, give you just more time to digest this and determine what kinds of information you would like to see.
Thank you, Ms. Samuels. I think you made it perfectly clear that PERS wouldn't inform us any further than you already have, but this would give us a little bit more time to maybe analyze or take a look at what happens in the news over the next few weeks that may, you know, maybe precipitory in our decision making, but which gives us more time, Mr. Mokrahisi. So that being said, we'd be looking at either, well, we're in session the April 26th, May 3rd, May 10th. So we'd look at that time frame to come back, Mr. Mokrahisi, with not setting a specific day, but one of those 3 dates perhaps to come back. And that would be inherent in the motion that I'm asking for. So I'm asking for a motion. Commissioner Berney.
I'm going to do my best to deliver what you're asking for, but bear in mind, the person asking for this just paid $1,500 In-N-Out burgers.
It's the milkshakes, man. They're so expensive.
It seems to me the intent here, and Carol, please shake your head if I'm off. The intent here is to start the PERS clock without committing the county. So I'm going to make a simple motion, and that motion is that I move to direct staff to submit paperwork to PERS to move forward in their analysis of a bond. Did I do that right, Carol? Okay.
I'll second.
Well simplified. Moved by Commissioner Berney, seconded by Commissioner Buck. We have a motion to start the TikTok on PERS. I summarized it even more greatly. So discussion to the motion. I see none. Then let's have a vote. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0 with Vice Chair Trieger absent, excused. Ms. Samuels, Mr. Watkins, thank you very much again for your presentation. You do a superb job of making words understandable.
Thank you.
I'm not that good. So with that, then we'll move along in our agenda. Thank you.
We will say goodbye, and Christine and Robert, let's catch up later today about moving that along. Okay.
We'll see you soon. Within a month to five weeks. Then Mr. Mokrahisi will step back into our agenda. Any other business? Actually, let's go back to review of assignments. I left that open because I thought there might be one. It sounds like there was one. The review of assignments.
Well, just that action that you took, and so we will submit the paperwork with PERS and come back to the board with the scenarios.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Mokrahisi. And any other business for the board? Then seeing no further business for the order of the agenda today, for the works of the agenda today, we will, at the sound of my gavel, we will adjourn and reconvene on April 12th at 9 a.m. We are adjourned.